more subsequently number that everybody comes up with for a development timeline, but in this particular case, we had 10 months to get this out. Publisher, like I mentioned, was EA, so there's a lot of expectations from a publisher that size. And the challenge that we saw in this is, obviously we're developing a game that's got across 2D and 3D, multiple handsets from low-end JSR right through to middle and high. It was an incredibly ambitious game from a content point of perspective. And these kind of things all come with a relative pressure onto the project when you're dealing with something that's this high profile, both for your client and from your side. These are the kind of projects that tend to make or break a developer like yourselves. So that being the brief, we'll move on to a bit of the reality. As it turns out, this particular project, the idea behind it was we were going to upgrade, we were going to upscale. In its previous existence, it was half of what it was once we were done. It only had featured 8 versus 8 on the field. They never had a full 3D component, things like that. So what we were going to do was keep a lot of the original legacy code as far as AI plays, things like that were concerned. But that instituted a very steep learning curve for a lot of the guys on the team to get familiar with that kind of thing. It just comes from when you start looking at someone else's code, everyone will do it a different method. And with our timeline, we can't go back to the very basics and redesign the wheel. We have to take it further, or we just wouldn't fit in what we needed. So the reality was that one was pretty harsh to come to terms with. Some of the more interesting things was EA got really ambitious and completely oversupplied us with a whole bunch of resources. This game, like I said, featured motion capture, much from the consoles. It also featured commentator voice, and with all this, I think it was something like they gave us an hour of motion capture animation that we had to condense into 2 minutes. That was our budget for the game. We could have 2 minutes of full running motion capture, and then we were just going to blow our budget. And the voice commentary, they gave us something like 55 minutes of voice commentary, and I only had a 3-minute voice budget for that kind of thing. But it was interesting. These are the kind of challenges that I would come across in a project like this. This is just from EA's zest to always push the margin, raise the bar, do something much bigger and better than before if they can. Another interesting bit was I started my career on Environment with this project, and prior to joining, did not know a thing about Madden really, never played the game, anything like that. So we had to bring out an expert onto site just so that I could reassure the client, listen, there is no problems. We're here because of our tech superiority. We can do the things we say we're going to do, put more players on the screen, make them higher poly, update them all, this kind of thing, not a problem. But if you are worried, we'll pay for an expert to come out on site. That expert just happened to be a guy by the name of Kevin Glinner, who was the original designer from that legacy code that was left over. He was the original designer that came out. Interesting times with that. Then the high-end versions started getting a bit of feature creep when EA saw the first of the prototypes and the first playable come out, and they started adding things that were never in our original scope to begin with. Things like skin tones and jersey numbers and stuff like that, just because we probably talked ourselves up a little higher than what we should have, and now we had to stick to that bar. So feature creep featured in this project, as it does in many of my projects, to be honest. It's just one of those things. We at Environment also don't believe in just hitting back and saying, no, we try and accommodate as much as we can. Mid-project, though, I do get a little scared the more things we stick in. And then later on, it was determined that EA actually wanted some play changes. The game Madden, I'm not sure who knows, but they play of set plays that are well balanced one against the other. This is all part of what was left over from the legacy code. They wanted us to change that. And the way it worked was used the world's most complex Excel spreadsheet I've ever seen. And it was one of the things Kevin had to do for the first 2 weeks, was actually educate us on how to use this Excel spreadsheet so we could do some of these changes. So the reality is a very challenging project in itself. 10 months, decent team size. It's a lot of guys who are doing daily tasks on things like this. And the result was pretty good. Madden turned out to be a real hit for us, and EA, bigger so for EA in the pocket, I would think. But we won a lot of awards and commendations on this kind of thing. And like I said, it is one of those defining little moments in a small-time developer at that stage. these are the kind of things that tend to make or break your profile and people's perceptions of you. So we were very chuffed with the end result of Madden. And we even completed it on time, all Madden ships at the same day, and we had great success in meeting that date. Right, that moves me on to my third case study, something entirely different, smaller project again. The recent movie tie-in, Ratatouille, Disney Pixar Animation Studios recent release. This was a really nice project to get into. The reason is it was a pretty simple design. It's a cooking game. Much of it based around the same kind of things like Diner Dash and other similar type games around time management and just speed of reaction. Generally, a lot of time the bars going around, things like this. I had one engineer and one artist. The artist wasn't full time. The engineer was. Timeline of 10 months for a simple little project. This is not a common case. It's a bit of a rarity even in mobile, but it does exist. I had one. And the idea around this is it's also because concurrently with this, you can be running other projects. And this is what is so really good about mobile production as opposed to being anywhere else. I don't want to name specifics, but yeah, being outside of mobile is that I can be running concurrently with up to 4 or 5 projects at a time. And that's really, really good cost-effective management. And again, like I say, it does come down to the person and if they're okay with that kind of level of multitasking. Publisher was THQ Wireless. We already worked with them before, so that wasn't a too difficult relationship to manage. The challenge in this game was it was a 2D only game. We were going to put it out for Brew in JSR 184. But the only challenge was actually 64K builds. We do get that a couple times in mobile. If you can imagine a game that has the game, it's got code, sound, effects, maybe some kind of sway animations and things like this, we would have condensed that into a 64K build. That's probably one of the biggest wow factors I ever had coming into mobile production in the first place, is the level of things that guys can cram onto a little phone like that and still make it enjoyable. Sometimes, still to this day, pretty much astounds me. The reality of working on this title was very simple. The publisher loved the design. I'm thinking too far. And that's really good straight off the bat, obviously, because then we don't go backwards and forwards for 3 weeks trying to sort out a good design. The production was not intensive, like I mentioned. 10 months for one guy to just sit by himself and work through most of the code. It's got a very low art overhead. Is really awesome, because from at least my point of perspective, I think I checked in once a week, if I remember, and that was it. And that's really good, especially when you, at the same time, like working on a Madden project, which you've got a lot more production overhead, and you're doing daily meetings with the team and keeping them on track, and you probably have a backlog of about 1,000 tasks in that game compared to maybe 10 or 12 on this one. The porting team actually raved about our portability of that code. It's one of the things we find in mobile production. We, the developer, make the game for a couple of reference handsets. The idea is the reference handsets go out to a porting company who then will further break it down so that it fits across the mind of the phones out there. This would cover literally 1,000 or more handsets that would go out on various networks and providers, should I say. Now, the problem there is with something like Ratatouille is porting code is usually the most difficult thing for the guys to work with, because we work on a reference handset, and that means essentially a lot of the engineers will stare the same thing in the face the whole day. We're working with one screen resolution, we're working with one deliverable size, we know what this handset's capabilities are and stuff like that, but we still got to always bear in mind that we've got to trim this back. We have to trim it back so that we know we can port to even smaller handsets than what our reference base actually has at that point. And in this case, when you have one engineer, not a hell of a lot of tasks to sit and work with, it's a 10-month time period, it is great because you can actually do that coding properly from the first word go, which is really good, because then it means you get a porting house that's very happy. It takes 2 days to review your code and say, great, we've got no hassles, we will port this all up in 6 weeks to the 1,500 handsets or whatever that Ratatouille are. And that's really nice, because it also makes the publisher, THQ, come back to you more often on the thought that, well, you're saving me quite a bit of costing there by not having to spend the next 3 months trying to port your code. So that was really nice. And then my first major hit from this project is 1 month before the end, THQ decided to replace the producer.